Welcome to the Intentional Prosperity Guide. My name is James, and today we're going to be talking about your emergency fund, why it's so important, and what it is, how to create one. And we're going to be sharing our story of recently how we had to use our emergency fund, which is why we stress so much having one on hand. I'm going to share you a couple of stories in my own life, including one that just happened this last week. Stick around. If you have an emergency fund or if you don't have an emergency fund, when would you use yours? That brings us to our question of the day. What is one circumstance where you would use your emergency fund to stave off a crisis? If you leave me a question, comment in the chat, or leave me a comment down below if you're watching this on a replay, I would love to know. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is James, and I'm a debt freedom coach. I teach people how to break free of the noose of debt and start living the life that you really want. And this is something that has been a huge part of our journey. One of the first things that we tell people to do is to start saving an emergency fund. Now, my views on this have changed a little bit over the years. I think initially you should make a lot of sacrifices, get at least 1 month's worth of your expenses into an emergency fund. And I know I've said different numbers over the last few months, but as I dive into more and more stuff, and I've gone through several crises myself, I think you should have a minimum of 1 month's worth of your expenses. I think that's the smallest emergency fund. You should be able to at least pay next month's expenses right now at any time. And if you ever have to get below a month, you stop any extra spending and put 1 month's worth of money back into your emergency fund. Now, why? The reason why we promote the emergency fund is because I keep having to use it. As we've gone through our financial struggles, as we've gone through things, we haven't been able to save fast enough sometimes to stave off an emergency. Emergencies are going to happen. Living life with your head in the clouds, believing nothing is going to go wrong, is a plan for disaster to strike. And there's several reasons why. I'm going to talk about kind of the physical strategic aspect of it, but also kind of the spiritual aspect, the mental, the emotional aspect of having an emergency fund. Because for me, having an emergency fund is not a sound financial decision. But sometimes we have unsound financial decisions because we have money that's just sitting there, not doing anything to help us. And, I do believe that cash is pretty much worthless, but having that cash emergency fund gives you peace of mind. Most people that I talk to can't even cover a $1,000 emergency. And that's the way I was living most of my life. I've shared my story several times about what happened when we first started this. And had we had an emergency fund, that crisis where our hot water heater went out, or our air conditioner went out, our electrical box wasn't up to code, Emily was just out of the hospital, we had to stay with my alcoholic father-in-law. And it was not a pleasant experience. And that's kind of what spurred us into this journey. That happened back in 2017. And, it was frustrating. And part of the reason why it became such a huge deal was because we had no savings. We had nothing in the emergency fund. We had a little bit of savings. We had a couple of $100. We had about $500 or $600 in savings at the time, but not nearly enough. And we had just spent most of that staying with Emily in the hospital. She'd been in the hospital for like a week and a half. And if you try to live out of a hospital with a diabetic for a week and a half, then you start to realize that that's really, really expensive. And eating out is the only option because you don't have the option to cook in your hospital room. And so, it just becomes really, really difficult. One of the things that we recently had just last week, our washing machine grater. Now, our washing machine's been going out for a while. We were saving money to replace it already. We had already looked in trying to the difference between repairing and replacing it. And once they did the service call, just to come out and look at it, which was going to be almost $200, just to come and look and see what was wrong with it, and then paying for parts, which are almost impossible to get right now because of the pandemic and everything, and then having them come back out, paying another service call for them to come back out, do the repair work, pay for their labor to repair it. It was almost going to cost as much just to fix it as it was going to cost to replace it. It was ridiculous. So we did a cost analysis. We did not just do this arbitrarily and say, oh, well, we have this problem, so we're going to go blow a bunch of money. But we did discuss it. We came to a mutual agreement. Anytime you should have an accountability partner. One of the great things about marriage is you have a built-in accountability partner for your finance. And anytime you're going to use your emergency fund, you should discuss it with an accountability partner first and really decide, get an outside objective opinion on whether or not this is an emergency that's worth using your emergency fund on. And one of the things that's helpful is to decide beforehand, these are what constitutes an emergency in which we will use the emergency fund. And this is something that Jessica and I've done. We did this several years ago. We sat down and said, okay, if these kind of things go wrong, then we will use the emergency fund to do those without question. If something else goes wrong, then we'll discuss it. But if these certain things go wrong, and guess what? One of those things is, our major appliances going down and not being able to use them. We have an agreement that if in a major appliance that we need, because we've only been a week without our washing machine, and we have no clothes, and we have piles and piles of clothes all over it. It's embarrassing to have our nurses even come into the house because we have so much crap all over the place, and most of it's just piles of clothes that are waiting to be washed. So what happened, we went to Dallas last week for some of Emily's doctor's appointments, and we came home and our washing machine went out, so we couldn't wash clothes. So we've got dirty towels. And then on top of that, Emily's been throwing up. She's had diarrhea. She's had all this stuff. So we have like towels and blankets and all this other stuff sitting around waiting to be washed. And we've washed some of it out. We washed as much of it out by hand as we could, but we need a washing machine. It's gotten to a place where it's critical. It's way too expensive to go out to a laundromat. And not to mention the fact that, being ADHD and using a laundromat is not a good thing. You tend to forget your clothes and lose stuff. So anyway, last Friday, Jessica went to town, and I stayed here with the nurse and Emily, and they went and bought us a new washing machine and a wash. We got a new washer and dryer combo, and it's coming tomorrow. It's going to be delivered tomorrow. But the fact is, the whole thing turned out to be kind of a good flow. Yeah, it's a little stressful not having clean clothes, but it's not been a financial crisis. The question of whether or not we would use the emergency fund didn't even have to come up because we had already decided beforehand that it was an appropriate use of the emergency fund. So the fact that we already knew it was going out. We had already been saving money. We were already working towards trying to do that. So we had a little bit saved. We just didn't have enough. But we were able to use it without questioning it and without a lot of stress. It didn't turn a minor crisis, which really is just a minor crisis. Your washing machine going out is kind of a minor thing, really, in the grand scheme of things. But it didn't turn into a huge financial crisis at the same time. This is why we want an emergency fund. Strategically, it is not an investment. Your emergency fund is not an investment. It should be, we like to park ours into something that earns a little bit of interest, like a high yield interest bearing savings account or checking account. Savings is better. But it's also, if you have two people, you're married, it needs to be an account that you both have access to. We had a time when we first started this that the emergency fund was in a savings account, and we didn't pay attention to the savings account, and Jessica was the only one with access to that savings account. Well, when she was in the hospital, I couldn't access the emergency fund. She was in the hospital. She was sick. She didn't need to be dealing with all that stuff, but she had to because I couldn't access the emergency fund. So if you have an emergency fund in a separate account from your main checking account, which it should be, then your emergency fund should be in an account that you both have access to in an emergency, because you never know what the nature of the emergency is going to be. So an emergency fund is not a sound financial decision, because that's money that's not working for you, and it can be a pretty big chunk of money. See, what we do is I recommend having a month's worth of your expenses in an emergency fund. And for people, parents with special needs kids like us, because of Emily, we recommend that you have at least $500 in cash in an emergency bag ready to go, so that all you do is grab that bag, put it in the car, and go to the hospital. If you have a child that frequently goes to the hospital, you need to always have a go bag packed ready to go, and you should have at least $500 in cash. And the reason we came up with $500 was because we had a hospital stay where we were in the hospital for a couple of weeks with Emily, and it cost us over $500 just for that hospital stay. Now, if I've got at least 500, then that gives me at least a week or so to make arrangements, to move money around, to do some things to where I can get some cash on hand. But I need that cash on hand so that I can focus on my child's care, my child's needs during that crisis. But even for normal people, I recommend a minimum of a month's worth of your expenses in an emergency fund in your checking account or in a savings account. It should be a high yield savings account, something that bears interest. And by the way, usually you have to get over $1,000. It depends on the bank, but usually for those, you have to have a minimum balance of $1,000 in there. If you have a month's worth of your expenses, which is, usually about $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 for some people, maybe $5,000. If you have that as your minimum, then you should at least exceed the minimum for those kind of accounts. When you're first starting out and you only got maybe a couple $100, you need to build it up first and then go open one of those accounts. But I recommend putting your emergency fund in a high yield account so that it does earn a little bit of money, but it's not going to earn much. I mean, ours gets like 1 or 2% interest rate. So it's not a money maker, but it gets at least a little something, so it doesn't feel like it's totally useless. And it just builds up, it's building up itself as you do that. Then you should be putting about 5%. Once you get that first month's worth, then I would say put about 5 to 10% of your income into that emergency fund every month until you build it up to about a year's worth of your expenses. And I used to say 6 months, and then this pandemic broke out. For most people, I still say 6 months, except we just had this worldwide pandemic where a lot of people were out of work for a year or more. I don't want you to have to worry about how am I going to pay my rent if a pandemic breaks out again, because they're talking about doing another lockdown. They're talking about stuff going on. There's always this talk that there may be another lockdown. Well, how are you preparing yourself for that lockdown? Are you saving an emergency fund? If you don't have an emergency fund right now, you should cut any and all entertainment expenses, anything extra, just for a little while. I'm not saying forever, but to save for an emergency so that if you get locked down again, you've got money to pay your bills. You've got money to put food on your table. You've got money on hand to take care of those things. I can tell you one of the biggest blessings for us in this pandemic was we had an emergency fund that was fully funded when the pandemic broke out. We had a fully funded month, about 6 months worth of our emergency fund when the pandemic broke out. I was still doing reselling, so we had some money coming in as well, even though it wasn't bringing in as much as I was bringing in at the prison. It wasn't fully covering our expenses. It was helping, and so it helped us stretch that emergency fund even longer. But when you have that emergency fund, you have some peace of mind. This is part of the spiritual, the mental, the emotional side. We can't just look at the numbers of, oh, well, that money could be doing better if it was invested somewhere. That's a sound financial decision, but sometimes peace of mind and personal peace is more important than whether that money is making money for you. I would rather have the peace of mind of knowing I have that cash on hand that I can get to. Now, I don't want, millions of dollars. This is where a lot of people blow things way out of a proportion. Oh, people just want to save forever, and all they do is save their way to wealth. That's not what I'm saying. But I want you to have at least a year's worth of your expenses cash on hand in case another pandemic breaks out, in case something happens, in case there's some major thing. And by the way, as inflation goes up, then that number has to go up. You have to pay attention to inflation and add more to it as inflation goes through. You should be constantly. And then we can look at it and see what's going on. Sorry, I blinked out for a minute there with my internet connection going in and out. So, our emergency fund is one of the most critical things in our life for us. It's spiritually, it changes the way you think about money. We talk about Murphy's Law, things go wrong. When you're in a negative energy state, well, let's talk about the spiritual energy side of it. When you're in a negative energy state, then you're going to be manifesting and creating more crisis in your life because you're in that negative energy space and you're mentally and emotionally in this disrupted, out of peace with yourself. That peace of mind that you get when you have an emergency fund shifts the way you think about money, shifts the way you think about crisis. And because you aren't stressed about that anymore because you have an emergency fund saved, spiritually, it puts you into a different vibration. It puts you into a different place emotionally when it comes to your money. So that's why one of the first things I say, save that emergency fund. It's going to shift your energy around money. It's going to shift how you think about money. It's going to shift how you think about a crisis coming up. Because now a car breaking down no longer becomes a financial nightmare. A washing machine going out doesn't become a financial nightmare. Your air conditioner going out does not become a financial nightmare. I don't want a small personal crisis to also be compounded by turning into a financial crisis. So now you have financial crisis and personal crisis at the same time. What's going to happen when you do that? Debt. You're going to go back into debt. Even if you're working on this debt payoff plan, if you're working on the debt snowball, you don't want to go deeper in debt while you're trying to get out of debt. And that's what's going to happen if you don't have an emergency fund. You're going to start using your credit cards. You're going to take out a loan. You're going to do something stupid with money to overcome the crisis. And that's why I recommend having that emergency fund. If you have that emergency fund, that is not investment money. That is not money to go out and buy stuff at the store because it's on sale. This is an emergency fund. It's to stave off a financial crisis. And one of the ways I look at it is, does it protect my household? So it should protect my four walls. Food. Does it put food on my table? Is this a crisis that will take food off my table? If so, then I need to use the emergency fund. Is this a food that will take my shelter off of my head or compromises my shelter? Storm comes through, blows the roof off of your house, you can use the emergency fund and pay for a new roof. Breaks a window, something happens, a window gets broken, something like that, use the emergency fund, pay to get it fixed. Number one. Number two, transportation. Is your transportation compromised? If your car breaks down, it can either go to fix the car or replace the car. Now, if you only got, $3,000 or $4,000 in your emergency fund, you're not going to go buy a brand new car. That's not a down payment on a car because we don't want to go deeper in debt. But we go buy maybe a $1,500, $2,000 car, which is, you can get a really decent car for about $1,500 to $2,000. Hey, I paid $400 for a car one time and I drove it for about 2.5 years. So you can buy hoopty cars for little to no money and still have money to pay the taxes and the registration. By the way, the insurance is going to be a hell of a lot cheaper if you don't have a car payment. So it's not just looking at, can I make the car payment? You also got to look at, what are you paying for the insurance? What are you paying for all this other stuff? If I got a $500 car, I'm not going to put full coverage insurance on that thing. I'm going to have basic liability, uninsured motorist, and personal injury protection. Those are the three insurances I think everybody should have on every vehicle. Collision and repair and all that stuff, you over insure your cars if you start putting all that stuff on there. But that's part of it, is I can use the emergency fund to go buy me another vehicle, so I'm not worried about it. And then as soon as I spend that emergency fund, I just replace what I had to spend. And usually I shouldn't have to spend the entire emergency fund, just a little bit of it, and then replace it. But again, spiritually, it changes your energy. It changes the focus. It changes what you do. You may not always be able to buy what you want, but you can get through the crisis without it becoming a financial nightmare, without going deeper in debt, without having to take out another loan in consumer debt. You know, we talk about debt, and the more I study personal finance, because I'm still studying, I'm always learning about personal finance, and I've kind of changed some of my views on debt recently. As I'm studying some of this stuff, I do now kind of believe that there is good debt and bad debt. Bad debt is consumer debt. Going out to eat and financing that's ridiculous. You know, buying new clothes, buying consumables, paying for your lifestyle on debt is horrible. But I mean, the only debt we still have left is our mortgage on our house. And I think, you know, it's okay. And I would love to get rid of the mortgage on the house, but I also would rather invest some money in things that are going to bring in income and cash flow. And then as you start building up some passive income streams, you know, cash flowing these emergencies means that's protection against using your emergency fund. But if you're just starting out and you don't have any investments, you're still trying to get free of the consumer debt so that you have money to invest. Because one of the reasons we talk about paying off debt before investing, my personal opinion, and I don't care which one you do as long as you're intentional about it, but I've seen people that invest first. I've seen people that pay off debt first, and I don't care as long as you're doing both at some point. I don't care. I'm not going to be mad at people that invest in real estate property. I even see people that are taking out debt to invest in real estate properties, and Jessica and I've even talked about possibly doing that ourselves. But that's debt that, one, we've already done the numbers in the properties that we're looking at, because we're actually looking at actually doing this, would more than pay for the actual difference in the debt and still put cash flow in our pocket. And so that's something you want to look at. If you're going to do those kind of investings, you want it to make sure that it exceeds what it costs to pay that debt and maintenance and repairs on the facility and all that stuff, and still puts cash in your pocket. If you can do that kind of a deal, then it's a worthwhile investment. Where a lot of people lose shirt on these real estate deals is they get a deal like a single family home. I would not invest in a single family home. I would at least, at the minimum, do a duplex or a triplex, because then you have more opportunities for it to be bringing in more cash flow. For example, if I do a duplex and the mortgage on that duplex, which, by the way, if you do anything less than 4 units on a multifamily, if it's 4 or less, then it's still treated as a single family mortgage. So you can do a regular 30-year mortgage instead of a commercial loan. If you're doing these big, huge apartment complexes and stuff, like some people teach, Grant Cardone, the problem with those, especially when you're just starting out, is you have to get a commercial loan on those. And that's what got Dave Ramsey in trouble. That's what got a lot of other people in trouble, is they get these commercial loans that have these huge balloon payments, and they don't cash flow enough to make the payments on the property, much less put any money in your pocket. You know, I can do a conventional 30-year mortgage, pay it off in less than 30 years, but I can just do a conventional 30-year mortgage on it if I put at least 20% down, I don't have PMI. So that puts the mortgage payment down low enough that I can cash flow enough to pay the mortgage, have money set aside for maintenance and repairs and all that kind of stuff on the facility, and still cash flow it. And I can even set it if I can get in the right location and I get my rents right. One of those, if I get a triplex, which is one of the facilities we're looking at, we have one we're actually looking at buying right now that's a 6-unit facility. Well, if I've got at least 2 of those units, I've already done the math. If at minimum 2 of them are rented at all times, I'm cash flowing on that property. Everything over 2 is cash in our pocket, because it takes 2 units being filled for the place to break even. So that's a pretty good deal. And that's without raising rents. If I go in and fix the place up, because then it has some damage. It's an older place. It's not in the best place. I can go in and I can probably do some work, clean it up, make it look a little bit nicer, raise the rents by $200 a month. And guess what? That increases the cash flow. And it raises the value of the property. So I have more equity in the property, because when you start doing that kind of deal, so back to the emergency fund, though, having that cash flow can protect your emergency fund. That's why I went off on that tangent, by the way. Having that cash flow could protect your emergency fund. Real estate investing for rental properties is something that I'm learning a lot about right now, because I'm fixing to pull the trigger and start doing it. But using debt to start that, but my process and my plan is I'm going to use debt to start it. I'm going to take out a loan to start the property, and then that cash flow is not going in our pockets to fund our lifestyle. That cash flow is going to do 2 things: 1, pay off my home mortgage, and 2, pay off that mortgage. That's it. Everything else it's going to do is just paying off those 2 mortgages as fast as I can. And then they're going to just cash flow like crazy. So it probably take me about 2 to 3 years to pay off both mortgages and then have them free and clear. Because I've already been doing the math on it. And that's if all the units are full. If I have some vacancies, it might take a little bit longer than that. But if all the units are full, if I can keep those units full, I can get some good tenants in there that take care of the place and do their part, and, good people, then I can cash flow that thing. And right now, rental properties are just not staying vacant. At least around here, rental properties, as soon as you post something for rent, it's like filled. I mean, it's just ridiculous of rentals right now. So anyway, back to the emergency fund. The whole reason I went off on that tangent is that's an investment that can protect my emergency fund, because that gives us cash flow. Cash flow means we have cash coming in from passive investments that we're not really doing a whole lot with, because once those things are rented, I'm going to have a property manager I'm going to have buffers in between me and the property. And that eats up some of the cash flow, but not enough of it to be worthwhile. I already kind of been running the numbers on that. But that puts a buffer between me and the property. That means I have cash flow that can help protect the emergency fund. But if we're just starting out, we don't have that cash flow yet. So we need that emergency fund even more. The more broke you are, the more critical it is that you have an emergency fund. I see so many people say, "Oh, well, I'll do the emergency fund later because I don't have enough money to have an emergency fund right now. I'm too broke to have an emergency fund right now." The more broke you are, the more critical it is that you need the emergency fund. You're not actually going to get there until you have the peace of mind, because then you're not stressed about how am I going to survive this week? How am I going to survive this month? How many people do I know right now that are like, "Oh, there's always more month at the end of the money." If you have a month's worth of money in reserves, then that's never going to be true again. That's only true because you're going into debt, buying stupid stuff, running up the credit cards. I had a friend of mine years ago that tried to be helpful. They were trying to teach me about personal finance, but they were completely didn't have any understanding of personal finance either, and they were broke. One of the biggest things that I learned is stop taking advice from people who are broke and start taking advice from people who are achieving what you want. You know, if I want advice on how to have a happy, successful marriage, I'm not going to turn to somebody who has a very toxic, destructive marriage. If I want advice on how to fix something on my car that's broke, well, for me, I'll probably just take it to them and say, here, fix it. If you can't fix it, then I'll take it to somebody else who can fix it. But if I was a do it myself kind of guy on the car and I needed advice, I would turn to somebody that knows how to fix that thing on the car, that's done it before, right? It's the same thing with your money. You want to turn to somebody who's actually built the kind of money that you want, that's done the kind of things that you want. You know why I'm getting into real estate investing? Because I'm turning to people who have done what I want to do. And one of the biggest things almost everyone I've talked to has said is there's a few things that people have said as far as investing, people that are actually doing it. But the number one is real estate. Almost every successful person that I know is investing in real estate in some way. Now, there's different ways you can do it, but almost every one of them also said you need an emergency fund. And you need an emergency fund. You want to buy a house? You need to have an emergency fund separate from your down payment and your closing costs and all that. You need to have an emergency fund in place before you buy a house. One of the biggest mistakes we made was buying a house without an emergency fund, and we were broke. One of the biggest mistakes that Jessica and I made was buying our house, and we sunk our emergency fund that we had at the time into the down payment on the house. And so when we bought the house, we had no emergency fund. Guess what happened? Oh, literally, the day after we moved in, our toilet blew up. It happened to be Thanksgiving weekend. It was Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., the day before Thanksgiving, and our toilet started flooding the house. Completely ruined. And we had no emergency fund. Not only that, but it was a holiday weekend. It was Monday or Tuesday before we were able to get somebody out to look at it because it was a holiday weekend. Because we moved into this house in November of 2016, the week before Thanksgiving, the week of Thanksgiving. We had just finished moving in, and our toilet flooded the house. We wound up having to replace the toilet, had to replumb the whole toilet. We wound up having to get a plumber out here. It was a mess. And we didn't have an emergency fund. Now, luckily, we had gotten this mortgage insurance program. What was it? Some kind of a home insurance for new home buyers. And it was a hassle to go through them, but they did pay to fix our toilet. But it took a while, and it took some time, and we had to use the plumbers that they sent us, which was crap. The people that they send you are not going to be the ones you would pick yourself. Oh, it's those home warranty programs. And I think that they're useful when you're broke, but they cost you more than they're actually worth. But they did save us some money the first couple of years because we had some things going wrong and we didn't have an emergency fund. And this was before we started the debt freedom journey. You know, this happened in 2016. We started in 2017. Started on our debt freedom journey. One of the things that we did one of the first things we did because we had to pay for that. We got it through the mortgage deal we did. We got it for the first year, and then we had to pay for it month to month after that. One of the things that we did once we had our emergency fund in place was we canceled that. Once we got to that emergency fund, well, we no longer needed that. We just said we're going to use the emergency fund. Now, I don't buy those add-on warranties and stuff because I have an emergency fund. If I need to replace it, I'll replace it. My phones break, I'll go replace them. I don't get the most expensive one either. I don't have an iPhone. I do have a Pixel 6 Pro, though. Almost as expensive as an iPhone, but we were able to save up money to pay for that. And the main reason why I do is because I'm a content creator. The only reason I got that expensive of a phone was because I'm a content creator, and it's got some tools in there that help me with my content creation when I'm using my phone. So it was a worthwhile expense because part of that can be written off as part of my business. But and mainly my phone, that's all I use it for, really. All the personal stuff, we use Jessica's phone, and my phone is pretty much my business phone. And only a handful of family members and people actually have that number for personal use. Everybody knows to call Jessica first anyway. So, one of the things that we do is we have to look at what are we using our money for and how are we using these funds that are coming in. So the emergency fund is one of the most important things that we do. So I'm going to take some questions. I did this Q&A video the other day, and the video didn't turn out, so I crashed the video. I just totally deleted it. So I'm going to go back and re-answer some of the questions that people had asked me. Some of it had to do with the emergency fund. Our emergency fund is one of the most important things. Why? You got to understand why. Why do you need it? Because you want that peace of mind, and you don't want a daily crisis to turn into a financial crisis. What do? We save at least a month. Once you get a month's worth, then we start putting money in the budget every month into the emergency fund up until it's about a year's worth of your expenses. And then we just roll that over into the debt. Then less and less things become a crisis. So one of the biggest things that people are asking me about all the time, and I kind of addressed this earlier, is should you do your debt payoff? And one of the questions that comes up with this is, I was talking about the real estate stuff, and one of the questions that a lot of people are talking about is, whether or not you should do a refinance on your house and take out cash to utilize the equity in your home, or do a HELOC. A HELOC is a home equity line of credit. I don't like HELOCs. And one of the biggest reasons why is because it's a variable interest rate. It's not a locked interest rate. Now, the advantage to a HELOC is you only actually that they approve you for the credit, but you don't have to use the credit, and you only pay for what you use out of it. That's the advantage. So if you're going to do a HELOC and you're not going to use the full funds, then it might be worthwhile to do it. A cash out refinance is where you have some equity in your home, you refinance the home, and usually for less than 80% of the value of the home, so that counts basically as your down payment, so that you owe less than 20% or less than 80% on the home and the value of the home at the time of the refinance. And then you can get some money out that you can use for investing in other things. But you need to do the math. It's all about doing the math. Like for me, doing a refinance makes sense because we bought our house in the worst way possible. So if I'm going to refinance anyway, I might as well do a cash out refinance. And I've actually been running the numbers. We've already been looking at it. I could do a refinance on our house, get cash out for the equity because our house is worth a lot more than what we paid for it because we got a really good deal. It was already worth more than what we paid for it when we bought it, and it's appreciated in the 5 years since we bought it. So for us, with the housing market the way it is, it would make sense to do a cash out refinance because we could get a lower interest rate. We could get rid of PMI. It would actually get cash out. We would owe more on the house than we owe right now. but we would have a lower mortgage payment. So I could refinance the house, get cash out of the house, and have a lower mortgage payment than what we have right now because we get rid of the PMI insurance, which is almost half of our mortgage payment is the PMI insurance. Because we have PMI insurance because we didn't put 20% down on the house when we bought it because we were broke and stupid. So I'm thinking about doing that. It's something Jessica and I are discussing because then I could take that cash out and I could use it to fund the real estate property that we're looking at that would cash flow the mortgage on this house and its own property. So I would do a cash out refinance just because that's where we're at. And I've been doing the math on it. The math on a Heloc is crazy. And one of the biggest problems why I don't like a Heloc right now is because a Heloc could honestly go up because the interest rates, one of the things that I'm looking at that a lot of people are talking about is the interest rates are fixing to skyrocket. And if those interest rates skyrocket, if the federal interest rate skyrockets, then your Heloc interest rate is going to skyrocket. So you're going to be paying much, much more in interest. And I wouldn't use a Heloc for consumables. I would never use a Heloc. Like I see a lot of people that take out a Heloc and use it to go on vacation. That is horrible. You're putting your house on the line with an unstable, horrible financial product, in my opinion, to go on a vacation. Save money and pay cash for your vacations. You should be paying cash for your lifestyle. The only reason I would recommend doing debt is for investments. Doing debt for things like buying your home, maybe buying a piece of real estate for investment property. Those are the only times I agree with using debt. Other than that, you should be paying cash for your lifestyle. If your lifestyle is costing more than your income, then you need to either increase your income or reduce your lifestyle because your lifestyle should be less than 50% of your income. That includes paying your four walls, which is your mortgage, your utilities, your food, your shelter, your clothing, your transportation, your basic necessities of survival should cost less than 50% of your income. And then you have the rest of your income for investing, generosity and giving, saving for the future, investing in your retirement. If you're not there, and I haven't been there for most of my life. I haven't been there. I've had times where my lifestyle was 100% or more of my income, which is why I was in debt. We had to do two things. One, we had to reduce the lifestyle quite drastically for a little while, but as my income increased, we were able to go back up in lifestyle. But you've got to get your lifestyle. You're never going to make forward progress as long as you're spending more than you're making every month. And most of the lifestyle decisions that people are making are not necessities. Most of the lifestyle choices people are making are not necessary. They're living either too much house. If your house is more than 30% of your income, we said your 50% should be your entire lifestyle. Your house shouldn't be more than 25 to 30%. If not, then that's part of why you're broke. You're paying too much for your housing. And that's either renting or owning. I don't care if you rent or own your home. You shouldn't be paying more than 25 to 30% of your income on housing. And I know I've been there. I've been there where it was like 50%. That 50% was my housing cost. And that's part of why I was broke. We had to increase the income so that we made more money. Oh, hello, Jessica. So one of the things that we have to do then is we have to reduce the lifestyle or increase the income or do a combination of the both. Most of what you think you have to survive is just marketing and conditioned behavior. Rather than based on what's in your own best interest. And by doing that, you actually hurt yourself in your long term financial plans. So, if we want to grow, if we want to improve, the only reason there's three main reasons why I would recommend somebody use debt for anything. One, buying their home is is hard. You know, buying an investment property, I can use debt to do that, but we want to pay that debt off so that it cash flows. And then I would buy your first property, maybe using a mortgage, pay it off, and then let it cash flow the second property and the third property and the fourth property. Once you get about 3 or 4 properties, and if you buy multifamily homes, you only need like one or two. I've already figured out, a 6 family multifamily home in the right location can cash flow our cost of living. And then every property I buy after that is just extra income that we can use for retirement, extra income that we can use for increasing our lifestyle, extra income we can use for setting money aside for Emily's care, you know. So, we got to get what's takes care of today. One of the things is everything, I talk about being intentional with your money. The number one thing to being intentional is, are we taking care of today? See, I see a lot of people that are, you know, filling up their retirement accounts, but they're suffering right now. Take care of today first. Get today stable financially, income wise. Get your expenses down, get your savings up for today. Get ourselves taken care of for today, then worry about retirement. You shouldn't be just sacrificing everything in the world now so that you can retire and be happy in 60 years or in 30 years or in 20 years. You know, I have a retirement account from when I worked at the prison, but I'm not contributing to it because I don't work there anymore. And I haven't contributed to it since shortly after we started this plan because I realized we have to take care of now, not the future. We got to take care of what's going on now. Now, people are like, oh, but the employer match. Screw the employer match. I mean, the employer match is nice as long as you're okay today. That's all I'm saying. If you're still going in debt now, but you're putting money aside for retirement later, that's stupid. You need to take care of today without going into debt. Can we take care of right now without debt? That's what's going to move your needle forward by taking care of today and taking care of where you're at right now financially. So that's why we're saving for an emergency fund. This is why we want to pay off debt because that's going to help us free up our income to be able to invest, to be able to take care of today, to be able to. It's not that I want people to have no lifestyle. It's not because a lot of people think I don't want you to have fun. I don't want you to have entertainment. No, that's not it at all. I want you to have those things. I just don't want you to go broke and deeper in debt. I look at my dad. I love my dad dearly, but he is so deeply in debt. He's 70 years old and he cannot retire because he's made stupid financial decisions and he lives way above his means. And he's never going to be able to retire because of that. And the other thing is, here's one of the things that I found as I've been studying wealthy people. I've studied really successful people. Most of the people that I know that are really, really successful. And I look at people like Dr. Wayne Dyer, who's one of my great teachers. And, I teach a lot of his stuff. He worked up until the day he died, not because he had to. He could have retired years earlier. He could have retired when he was like in his early 50s. But he worked up until the day he died in his 70s. Why? Because he was doing what he loved to do. He was following his passion and his calling, and he happened to make a lot of money doing it. The money wasn't the reason. See, a lot of people are just working for money and then they're buying stuff to fulfill how unfulfilled they are because they're not doing something with their life that leaves them fulfilled. If you're doing something with your life that gives you a sense of fulfillment, then you don't have to spend money on entertainment to get a sense of fulfillment. If you're having to spend money on consumerism to get a sense of fulfillment, you're searching for something outside of you that should come from inside of you. And this is where so many people are broke because they're trying to buy fulfillment instead of going in and saying, what am I doing with my life that gives me fulfillment? Because that's free. I create this kind of content not because I'm not getting rich. I don't get that many views. I do this content and I do this stuff that I'm doing because it gives me a sense of fulfillment without having to go out and buy it. Yeah, I put a little bit of money into my content and stuff, and we're doing things to monetize that content. But the main reason I do it is because it makes me feel fulfilled to help people. There's nothing more fulfilling to me to get those people that contact me and comment and say, "Thank you so much. You gave me this advice, and this is the change I saw in my life because of it." That for me is much more fulfilling than opening my bank account and seeing $1,000 deposit. I know it's weird, but for me, that is. Money's never been a huge motivator for me, but money's important because we do live in a capitalistic society, whether you like it or not. Doesn't really matter. We are in that kind of a society right now, and money is a necessary part of that society. Now, if that changes, then I'll probably won't talk about money because money's not a big motivator for me. Money never has been a big motivator for me. That's been one of my big problems. And part of why I've been broke most of my life is because money was never a big motivator. But part of it's our relationship with money has to shift. And that's one of the things I've been working on myself over these last 5 years since we started our debt freedom journey is my relationship with money has changed. The way I think about money has changed. Money is an energy, but it's there to serve myself and to serve other people. And it's something that it's not evil. It's not bad, but it's just a tool that we can use to serve ourselves and to serve other people. But it's not our motivator. Money is not the motivator for me. Seeing people get free of debt, that's a motivator for me. Seeing people actually able to follow their calling, that's a motivator for me. Helping other people be able to find something that they're passionate about doing and living their life in alignment with that passion instead of working to make a paycheck for benefits, that is a motivator for me. That's what motivates my content. That's what motivates me to come out and do these live streams and to talk to people on Clubhouse and talk to people here on social media about these issues. That motivates me way more than whether or not I made a lot of money from doing it. But it's also, we've got to get our money right to have the freedom to do that. See, most people are a slave to their money because they're broke. They're slave to paying a bill rather than living their calling and living in alignment with what they're here to do and finding fulfillment from inside themselves. When you start getting yourself financially set, I'm not saying rich. You don't have to have millions of dollars in the bank, but you need an emergency fund. You need to be free of debt, and you need to be able to make decisions based on what fulfills you rather than what's going to pay the bills. Too many people are living their lives based on what's going to keep a roof over my head. And they're so stressed out. That's where all the stress is coming from because they're living from one day to the next without a plan. That's why we do a budget. I see people, oh, you don't need a budget. We just need to out earn our stupidity. And we can just do whatever we want with our money as long as we just find a way to make more. Well, that's kind of stupid too. That's why there's a lot of people that are fake rich because there's a lot of people that can bring in a lot of money and they're putting on a show of being rich. But in reality, they're in so much debt that they actually have a negative net worth. I know people that make 10 times more money than I do that have a lower net worth than I do. I have a positive net worth. My net worth is worth about $200,000 right now. That's my positive net worth. That's my assets minus liabilities. That's what your net worth is. I have a positive net worth right now. I also have a new washer and dryer coming. Why? Because we had an emergency fund, and when it turned into a crisis, we were able to say, hey, let's go spend it. And it didn't turn into this big, huge knockdown, drag out fight of whether or not we should spend that money or not. Because we had already knew that this fit within covering our four walls, because part of covering our clothing is being able to clean those clothing so that we can wear them. Doesn't help to have clothing if you can't wear them. So, we talked about, does it cover the four walls? Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, utilities. Clothing is one of those, and being able to clean those clothing so that we can actually wear them falls under that category to me. Now, it may not to you, and that's fine. That's where you've got to sit down with your accountability partner, your spouse, whoever it is, and say, okay, these are the things that we are willing to spend the emergency fund on. Before you ever do anything, that should be one of your first agreements, is sit down and write this out, and it's a contract. And you say, we are going to write down, this is what we're willing to spend the emergency fund on. And we agree to it, we sign it, bam, one of those things comes up, automatic, spend it. No questions asked, no discussion needed. It's in the four walls, it's in the agreement. We spend it, we don't even have to discuss it. Anything outside of that, and it's a question of whether or not we should spend it, that requires a financial budget meeting and sit down and say, do we really need this right now? That's the fun. Is it a necessity or is it a want? There's too many people. The part of the reason why so many people are going deeper and deeper in debt is because they're letting marketers tell them what they need instead of really going inside themselves and saying, is this a need or is this a want? And being honest with themselves and getting away from, look, a marketer is going to tell you every reason they need their product. That's their job. Their job is to make you want to buy what they're selling. So they're going to tell you all the upsides to buying their product and none of the downsides. That's what marketers do. I'm not mad at marketers. I do marketing myself. That's part of what we do. That's what sales is all about. It's about telling somebody and convincing somebody of why they need your product. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be in business. And everybody's selling you something. It might even be time, but they're selling you on something. It's just a fact of life. It's just part of the way our society works. You are so loaded with marketing messages, sometimes without even realizing it. And we've got to break free of those marketing messages. This is why I teach people to do the spiritual work. The more you heal your traumas inside, the less those things are going to trigger you into spending money that you really don't have to spend, by the way. If you have gas as a content creator, gas is gear acquisition syndrome, where you just keep having to buy more and more stuff for your studio or buying more and more gear. Hey, I got some of my gear has some money invested in it, but it's stuff I've slowly invested in over the last 10 years as I've been a content creator. I haven't gone out and spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars on gear like some of these creators have. And most of it, like microphone right here, I got that out of a storage unit that I bought. The microphone I'm using right now came out of one of my storage units that we bought when we were doing the storage scavenger. It's a pretty good microphone. It's about $100 microphone, and I paid $5 for the unit. Boom. There's a good way to get some studio gear. Anyway, but the point is, are you really doing what you need to do? Are you really needing what you're buying, or are you just spending money on stuff to fulfill an emotional emptiness inside? if you find that fulfillment inside, we do the deep inner healing work. We start looking inside of ourselves to find fulfillment, and we spend less money because we don't have to look outside of ourselves and we don't have to consume. One of the things I learned as I study wealthy people is wealthy people create things to sell and poor people buy things. Wealthy people sell. So if you want to be wealthier, you got to learn to sell and stop consuming. You want to start, you've got to say, no, I don't really need that in my life. And the only way you're going to do that is to do that and honestly mean it. And the only way you're going to do that is to do the healing work inside and break free of that marketing mindset and that consumerism mindset. Is you've been conditioned from the time you were born that you have to buy stuff to feel happy, to feel fulfilled. And it's not, there's the old axiom that says money doesn't buy you happiness. And it's true. Buys a lot of stuff that you think is going to make you happy. See, most people aren't going into debt because they think money's going to make them happy. They think that stuff they're spending money on is going to make them happy. And if you're using debt, you're just spending somebody else's money to consume things that you think are going to make you happy. And how much stuff do you buy and never actually use? I got a house full of stuff that keeps being bought and bought and bought and bought and bought that never actually gets used. And some of it's just shrugged off because it wasn't our money that was spent on it. It was somebody else's money. I'm all for using other people's money as long as they don't have to pay it back. Grants, scholarships. We use a lot of federal grants and scholarships and things to get equipment for Emily, but we don't have to pay that money back. A lot of the medical but I'm also not, wanting to be dependent on those things. I want to be financially independent, and we can't be financially independent and be dependent on the government. One of the things I've seen going around TikTok and Instagram and Clubhouse and some of these communities that I've been in is this idea of a socialistic society and socialistic, specifically healthcare system. I've been dependent on the government. It's a very negative mindset, and it's being clouded in this toxic positivity of the love and life culture is how they're promoting it. But it's really toxic. It's a very toxic belief system because it's an entire belief system in which I have to be dependent on the government for my health care. Anytime you make yourself, and logically it doesn't make sense because the government is proven time and time again, every single day, to prove how inefficient they are at managing anything that they're given the power to manage. So why would we want to give them control of our healthcare system? I believe that our healthcare system is out of control and is full of corruption and greed? Absolutely. Look at the big pharmaceutical companies. It's ridiculous how much money they're making. But giving government control of that is not going to make it any better, because guess what the government's going to do? If you think about it, if they have a government-controlled healthcare plan, which is currently one of the worst healthcare plans you can be on is government-controlled healthcare plans. I know because we're on it. So if you have high care medical needs, this is the worst, most inefficient way to run your healthcare. Two, okay, these big pharma companies and these medical insurance companies are ripping people off. They are a ripoff, and I get it. And that's why people want to just give it to government, because the corporations that are running it right now. But see, what we need to get is we don't need to give it to the government, which is because see, all you're talking about is taking it out of the hands of greedy, corrupt, selfish people and putting it into the hands and the responsibility of greedy, corrupt, selfish people. See, it's not the corporations running it that's the problem. It's the greed and the selfishness of the corruption of the people running those companies. It's not that privatized healthcare is a bad thing. It's the greed and the selfishness and the corruption that's got to go. We got to really get into where's the real problem, because taking it from corporations and giving it to the government, who do you think the government's going to get to hire to run those things? The people that are already running it now through private corporations. They're just going to get hired by the government to run the, and they're going to do the same thing that they're already doing. Why? Because they're the most qualified to do it, because they've already got experience doing it. What are they going to do? They're just going to keep lining their own pockets and taking more money away from you and raping you for everything you're worth. It would make our healthcare system worse, not better. As bad as our healthcare system is, giving it to the government would only make it worse. Does that mean I know what's the right solution? I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. But I know giving it to the government, making us more and more dependent on the government for our day-to-day lives and for our afford her medical bills without them. And I can tell you, the government employees make more of her medical decisions than we do. Some untrained minimum wage government employee who has no medical background, has no relationship with my daughter, has no knowledge of what the hell they're talking about. They're just going by a formulaic list of this is approved, this is not, this is approved, this is not. That's all they're doing. They're going by a checklist. And if she doesn't check off every single box on that checklist, she's denied access to that medical care. Period. End of story. No questions asked. That's the way it is. And that's the way it will be with a government run program for everybody. Now, does it make it affordable? See, that's the thing, is you're only making it, the only way you can say giving it to the government makes things better is the only part of it you're looking at is the money. And I get it. It's expensive. I think they are extorting people. And I get that. But the government is just as guilty of extorting people as these private corporations. So giving it to the government to control is not the answer. We've got to get rid of the greed and the corruption that's running the systems. Not give the problem to the government to solve. See, if your entire financial plan is that the government's going to take care of me, that's a bad decision. Spiritually, you're giving up control of your spiritual walk. All these people that think, oh, I'm still going to be in control, but the government's going to, take care of me. No, because when you are dependent on somebody else to take care of you, you are giving them control. You are disempowering yourself. You are giving them power to make decisions for you that you should be making for yourself. The one who pays makes the decisions. So you either learn how to become financially independent so you can pay for it yourself, or you're letting the ones who are paying it make the decisions. Whether it's a corporation, whether it's an insurance company with corporation, or if it's the government, doesn't matter. As long as you're dependent on somebody else to pay it, they are the ones making the decisions for you and what's in your best interest, based on really what's in their best interest financially. Because that's all they care about. If they're the ones paying for it, and that's their only stake in it, is they're paying for it, all they care about is what am I paying? That's the problem with it. You're making something that's deep and personal and that you need to be in control of, but you're not willing to take responsibility for your money. You're broke, so you want somebody else who's not broke to pay your bills, but you don't want them making the decisions. Guess what? If they're paying the bill, they're making the choices. They're deciding whether you need it or not you. That's why I have a problem with government-run healthcare. This is why I have a problem with government programs. I believe in government programs to help people who are disabled and help people who are unable to go out and do more. But this whole idea that the government subsidized living, paying your cost of living expenses, the socialistic idea that the government's going to pay, that only works if there's no greed and corruption in the government. In the government, there's never been a government in the world history that wasn't full of greed and corruption. Not one government in the entire history of this planet was free of greed and corruption. Not one. So why do you think there's going to be one now? Because your entire plan requires there to be no greed or corruption in the government, and that has never happened, and it's not going to happen now. You need to get your head out of the clouds, get your love and light toxic bullshit out of the way, and realize that the world is not all love and light. And realize that the world is full of greed and corruption, and the government is just as bad at it as these corporations. We need to get rid of the greed and corruption. That's the problem. Not the fact that we have capitalism or socialism. That's not the problem. The problem is greed and corruption. And that's a very individual thing. Not all corporations are greedy and selfish and corrupt. A vast majority of them are. The biggest ones are, but not all of them are. There's some small companies that are really good people, that are actually using the funds that they have properly, that are not lining their own pockets. There's companies that you don't hear about because they're so small that actually are doing a phenomenal job at serving their customers and serving their people. You just don't hear about them because they don't have billions of dollars to spend on advertising, because they're not paying their corporate executives millions of dollars per year. You don't have to make millions of dollars a year to be successful in this world. I know a lot of really small mom and pop style companies, and I think that's really what we need. I'm saying that we don't need these big conglomerate companies. We need smaller mom and pop style companies to run some of this stuff. But they can't afford to compete because of all the greed and corruption in the big guns. The big guns put them out of business or buy them out. Because all they do is throw money at themselves and at problems. You get these government bailouts. One of the problems with some of these government bailouts of bailing out all these corporations is that is not helping you at all. All they're doing is lining their own damn pockets with those government bailouts. Oh, look, we had record lows for the year. We're going to give ourselves a raise with the money that the government gave us to help us serve our customers better. Raising the minimum wage. You think that raising the minimum wage is going to solve your freaking poverty problem? All it's going to do is move the poverty line. Raising the minimum wage, all it does is raise the poverty line, because those greedy sons of bitches at the top are not going to give you a raise without giving themselves a raise and everybody in between. And guess what? They're going to take that out of the pockets of the consumers by raising their prices. Mass inflation. Yes, we're already seeing mass inflation. But if you think raising the minimum wage from $9 an hour to $15 an hour is not going to cause mass inflation even more than we're already seeing, you're insane. The math has never supported that. Do I believe that people deserve a living wage? Absolutely. Do I think raising the minimum wage standard of living is going to solve that problem? No. All it's going to do is move the poverty line, and now all of a sudden $15 an hour is not a living wage. Period. We're already seeing that, by the way. Companies have been naturally on their own raising their minimum wage, and what are they doing? Every one of them that's raised their minimum wage has also raised their prices. McDonald's, you can't get a McDonald's meal for less than $10 anymore. but most of them are paying like $15 to $20 an hour. The other thing is that they're cutting those employees' hours like crazy so they don't have to pay them overtime, so that they don't have to pay them benefits. So people that were working 40 to 50 hours a week at McDonald's are now working like 20 to 30 hours a week. Yeah, they're getting paid $15 an hour instead of $10 an hour or $9 an hour, but they're also only getting like 15 to 20 hours a week of work, which means they still aren't making enough money to pay their damn bills. When I worked at the prison, I had to work overtime in order to make ends meet. If I didn't work overtime, we were broke. And guess what? The prison that I used to work at, they've cut all overtime during this pandemic. I couldn't have afforded to keep working there. Had I not gotten out of there, I'd have been screwed. I couldn't afford to keep working there. And there was a lot of people that were in the same boat. They quit because, yeah, they might have made a little bit of a bump in pay, but then they cut their hours. They cut out all the overtime, and they cut their hours back to where they were only working 20 to 30 hours a week. Well, you should be grateful that you still have a job. Yeah, well, having a job that doesn't put a roof over my head, and I agree. I think people should have, if you're working 40 to 60 or 80 hours a week, you should not have to live on government assistance. Do I believe that to be true? Yes. Do I believe that raising the minimum wage is going to fix that problem? No. The math does not support it. The historical data does not support that argument. The historical data supports that every time there's been a minimum wage increase, which has usually only been by $1 or $2, by the way. Think about it. When we went through the minimum wage increases in the 90s and the early 2000s, we went from $5 an hour to $7.50 an hour. Then we went from $7.50 an hour to $9.50 an hour. So we're talking about small incremental increases, and there was inflation that went with that. And you're talking about almost doubling the minimum wage. So we've had inflation since then. Do I think it should have been raised sooner? Yes. Do I believe that it's going to not almost doubling the minimum wage? It's never been that big of a jump. And it's going to cause mass inflation. There's no way it can't happen. Guess what that means? It just moves the poverty line. So now it's going to move from making $40,000 a year, which is our current poverty line, is about $40,000 a year. If you're making less than $40,000 a year, you live below poverty. It's going to move that to about $60,000 a year. If you raise the minimum wage, that's what's going to happen. You're going to raise the poverty line. There's no question about that. The math supports that. But most people don't do the math. They just want to have an emotional knee-jerk reaction instead of actually sitting down and crunching the numbers. I crunch numbers all the time. That's why I do financial coaching. I crunch numbers. That's what I do. I do the math. If you make $15 an hour, and that's the minimum wage, and now it's going to cost you a minimum of $5,000 a month to survive. I know people right now that can't hardly make $2,000 a month and survive. Can't survive on that. Just raising the minimum wage is going to increase our cost of living to a point where $15 an hour is not a survivable, livable wage. That's all it's going to do. Historically backs that up. It's not going to change anything. Do some math. Because you think those, again, goes back to what I was saying earlier. Greed and corruption is what's going to rule that. You think we're going to eliminate the problem by giving just the lowest people a raise and nobody else. No, because guess what? Their supervisors who were making $15 an hour aren't going to want to continue doing their job for $15 an hour if the people that they're supervising are already making $15 an hour. So those supervisors have to get a raise. And then those supervisors have to get a raise. And then the people above them have to get a raise. And the corporate executives aren't going to give the lowest level people on the totem pole a raise without giving themselves a raise. And where is that money coming from? From the consumers. from the people that are buying their products and services. Period. They're not going to take money out of their own pocket. They're too greedy and selfish. These multi-million dollar a year corporate executives are not going to take money out of their own pocket to pay their employees. They're going to take money out of your pocket to pay their employees. They're going to take money out of their employees' pockets to pay their employees. See, we got to get, the problem isn't the numbers. The problem isn't the math. It's not even a math problem. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's greed. It's corruption. It's selfishness. It's all the lower negative energies that are ruling this planet. And if you don't believe that the lower energies are ruling the consciousness of this planet, this is why we've got to work as light workers. We've got to be working on raising consciousness. The only way we can raise the consciousness globally around money is to raise our own consciousness around money. We can't serve another person to raise them out of a low level of consciousness from a low level of consciousness. Most of the work I see being done in this area is low conscious energy trying to tell low conscious energy to raise up. You can't root there. You can't take somebody somewhere you're not willing to go yourself. You have to raise your own consciousness first and then bring other people up with you. We're not going to get rid of greed and corruption from a low level of consciousness. We have to raise the consciousness, which means we have to work on our own individual consciousness and then work on raising the consciousness of those around us. This is what I'm doing with intentional prosperity. This is what intentional prosperity is all about. It's about intentional prosperity for this is where we have to have some compassion for those people too. This is hard to do because we have to have some compassion for them because they are simply operating out of an energy of fear. That's a low consciousness around money. They think that they're really successful, but it's really just fear-based conditioning because they're all conditioned. They're conditioned differently than you are, but they're just working out of conditioned behavior. If we're going to raise that consciousness around money, we got to raise our own first. How are we going to do that? Get out of debt. Stop consuming. Start saving money for an emergency fund. Start investing in yourself. The most important investment you can make is investing in yourself. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. We have to invest in ourselves before we invest in other people's products. That means we invest in things that are going to bring us passive income. We invest in things that are going to bring us wisdom, knowledge, information, books, programs. Learn as much as you can. You want to understand how to change corporate America, then you better start studying how corporate America works. Not making a fly-by-night decision based on ignorance, which is what most of what people are spewing, is ignorance. They don't really understand how the system works. Start educating yourself on how the system really works, and then we can work on changing the system. But when you have no education to back up your claims, that's not wisdom. That's arrogance, and it's BS. 90% of what's being said about how corporate America works is BS because the people that are spewing a lot of this stuff and that want to see the systemic change. Yeah, I want to see systemic change too. The only way you're going to see systemic change is to raise your consciousness in that level. And the only way to raise your consciousness is one, gain discipline and wisdom, love, and then surrender. That's the 4 keys to intentionality. When we can do that, we can change the world. You can't do that where you're at right now. Hope that this has been helpful. We talked a bit about the emergency fund and emergency savings and why it's important. We answered a few questions, and I went on a little bit of a rant for about the last 30 minutes. So I hope that this is helpful. We are going to cut it off. I've got some favors to run and some other things to do around the house today. Y'all have a fantastic day. We'll see you next weekend. Every weekend, usually Saturday or Sunday. I mean, usually Sunday, but sometimes on Saturdays we do our weekly live stream. So make sure you subscribe to our channel and come back and see us again. We'll see you next time.